Let me be honest. It's really hard to know the exact chronological order of the events in Jesus' last week. Even commentaries and resources differ on some of these things. So I've tried my very best to piece together a somewhat accurate account of Jesus' final week, the events in which they took place. On Tuesday, after the famous Olivet Discourse, Jesus and the disciples returned to Bethany. I wonder how much sleep Jesus got in those last few hours. He's thinking ahead. He's thinking of the cross. He knows what's going to happen. I wonder if Mary positioned herself at his feet like she had done earlier. You know, it just seemed like Mary loved to listen to Jesus. I wonder if in that last week, Mary was just excited that she got to see Jesus a little bit more than normal. You know, of course, that's my own interpretation. Jesus had been very busy, not just in this last week, but the last 3 years. He had caused quite a stir in this country. People were drawn to him. Crowds were growing in multitudes with every step that he took. Controversy surrounds him. The religious leaders hate him, but many can't get enough of him. Jesus needed rest just like the rest of us. He was human. He got hungry, he got tired, he got thirsty. So it's no surprise that he takes a day of rest, which scholars believe happened on this Wednesday of his final week. While Jesus was resting in Bethany, a lot was going on in Jerusalem. People were arriving from all over for the Passover celebration. The inns were filling up, the marketplace was bustling with shoppers, and the stench was strong because of all the animals arriving for the sacrifice. And the religious leaders, they were busy behind closed doors. Matthew tells us exactly what was going on in Matthew 26, 1-5. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, Passover begins in 2 days, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." At that same time, the leading priests and elders were meeting at the residence of Caiaphas, the high priest, plotting how to capture Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the Passover celebration, they agreed, or the people may riot. With hundreds of thousands of pilgrims descending upon Jerusalem for this feast, rioting would not be unheard of. Such admiration for Jesus by so many people would surely cause a riot if they tried to harm him. So now the question becomes, why did the religious leaders hate Jesus so much? Well, here are a few reasons. One, because of the claims that he made. He claimed to be their Messiah, the one that the Old Testament prophets prophesied about. He claimed to be God. And with that claim, that meant that his authority would outweigh their authority. This was what they called blasphemy, and this was a felony punishable by death. Two, he confronted them with the wickedness of their heart. In Matthew 23, he called the religious leaders blind guides, hypocrites, and whitewashed tombs. Basically, he said, you are beautiful on the outside. You do everything right on the outside, but on the inside, you are dead. He called the inside of their bodies dead men's bones. Standing next to the holiness of Jesus revealed to them the wickedness of their hearts, and they did not like that. Let me say this. Standing right next to Jesus should reveal to us our sinful hearts. It happened to Peter. In Luke 5, Peter was in the boat with Jesus, and Jesus had been teaching. And then Jesus tells Peter to take the boat out a little bit further. And when he gets out there, Jesus said, "Now let down your nets into the water." And when Peter let down the nets, so many fish filled up that net that it began to break. And it was at that moment that Peter recognized his humanity in light of Christ's divinity. And then we read in Luke 5:8, when Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "Oh Lord, please leave me. I'm such a sinful man." You know, being right next to Jesus is the best place that you and I can be. But for the religious leaders, they were not having it. And then 3, he was a threat to their religious system. He often bucked the system, like healing people on the Sabbath. But here's the thing. The religious leaders had added hundreds of man-made laws to the law that God had already put down. And then they enforced it on the people. And it was like this huge weight on people, and they could never uphold the law anymore, including the religious leaders. But the religious leaders wanted everyone to think that they were completely obedient to all of it. And 4, they hated the people that Jesus associated with. You know, the religious leaders were filled with pride and arrogance, and they took pride in the fact that they didn't hang out or didn't associate with sinners. But these are the people that Jesus spent the most time with. In fact, one specific scenario happened in Luke chapter 5 when Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house. And at this dinner were a lot of tax collectors. We read in Luke 5:30-31, but the Pharisees and their teachers of religious law complained bitterly to Jesus' disciples. "Why do you eat and drink with such scum?" Jesus answered them, "Healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do." Aren't you so glad? Aren't you just glad? These are just a few reasons why they hated him so much. But the religious leaders had tried unsuccessfully many times to take Jesus down during his ministry. But they would always be unsuccessful until it was the right time. It was God's timetable. God would determine when Jesus would die, not them. As turmoil was brewing in Jerusalem, there is one specific event on this Wednesday that's recorded for us. And it's recorded in Matthew 26, 6-13. Jesus was having dinner at Simon the leper's house when a woman walked in and poured oil on his head. The disciples were indignant and very upset because they said she should have used this money for the poor. But Jesus praised her for it. We don't know who this woman was, but obviously she loved Jesus very, very much. And she gave up something very valuable for him. And Jesus honored her sacrifice. Are you willing to give Jesus what's most valuable to you? Maybe your control, your plans, your family, your life. I mean, this is something that we should definitely think about a lot. Now let's quickly return to Jerusalem. While the religious leaders were meeting at Caiaphas' house to determine how they were going to seize Jesus, a surprise visitor shows up at their door. Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' very own disciples, shows up and asks them in Matthew 26:15, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And then we read that they paid him 30 pieces of silver, which is an equivalent of 5 weeks' work for the Jewish man in that day. 30 pieces of silver. Let me say it again. 30 pieces of silver. Was it worth it, Judas? Well, we're going to find out shortly that no amount of money would give Judas what he was looking for. The same is true for you and me. Jesus is the only one that can give us what we're looking for, whether it's peace, joy, fulfillment, contentment, worth. Jesus is the source of all of these things. Listen to what it says next in Matthew 26:16. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. You know, I'm thinking that every Christian that has experienced the goodness of God and the mercy of God, and every believer that has been accepted into his family and has enjoyed the rich benefits that Jesus offers, has trouble with this betrayal. How could Judas do this? How could he? The one who walked with Jesus for 3 years, he saw Jesus do unbelievable things, even raise people from the dead. How could he betray Jesus? The only answer that we have is that Judas was not a true believer. How do we know this? Because in John 6:70, Jesus called Judas a devil. And in John 17:12, Jesus said that Judas was headed for destruction. So the plan had been hatched. Judas was on the lookout, and he would wait for the perfect opportunity. The opportunity that would present itself, and then he could hand Jesus over to those who hated him the most. Of course, Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen. He knew that they would come for him and that they would put him to death. But his love for you and me was so great that he went through with it. He knew that this was the only way that we could be set free from the condemnation of sin and be given eternal life with him in heaven. How thankful I am. The time prepared long before the world was created and the time that the prophets spoke about is nearing an end. Let's keep our eyes wide open as we continue to follow Jesus on the road that led to the cross.